Hello, everyone. Thank you again for your patience, and welcome to the webinar titled How to Migrate Drug Safety and Pharmacovigilance Data Cost Effectively and with Minimum Risk, presented by Dr. Rodney Lemry from BioPharm Systems and Richard Higger from Valiance Partners. I'm Eugene Stefanov, the Marketing Manager at BioPharm, and I will be going over some housekeeping items before I turn it over to Rodney and Rick. During the presentation, all participants will be in listen-only mode. However, you may submit questions to the speaker at any time today by typing them in the chat feature located on the left side of your screen. Please note that other webinar participants will not see your questions or comments. Nonetheless, your questions will be addressed as time allows towards the end of the presentation. If you still have unanswered questions after the webinar or would like to request information from Valiance or BioPharm, feel free to visit the company's websites for contact information. As a reminder, today's webinar is being recorded and will be posted on BioPharm's website within 24 hours. We will also be emailing you a link to the recording. This concludes our housekeeping items. I would like to now turn the call over to Rodney and Rick.
Thank you, Eugene. Good morning, everyone, afternoon or evening, depending on where in the world you might be. Welcome to the webinar entitled Partnering to Provide Best Practice. It is a webinar to address the migration efforts and a migration solution, comprehensive migration solution that Valiance Partners and BioPharm Systems have worked in conjunction to produce. My name is Rodney Lemry. I'm the Vice President of Global Safety and Pharmacovigilance here at BioPharm, and I would like to introduce my co-presenter today. Rick, would you like to tell us a bit about yourself?
Yeah, good morning. Good afternoon, I guess, depending upon your whereabouts. My name is Rick Higger, and I'm the President of Valiance Partners.
Great. So I think we're just going to go ahead and get started. So just a small agenda here for us to cover, just to kind of give you a framework for what we intend to cover for the webinar today. We're going to begin by giving you a summary of the migration challenge as we have seen it practically in our experience. We will look at the state of the industry using some literature and recent white paper data, specifically on migration efforts and the typical problems seen. And then we will provide you our package solution, which is an Oracle Accelerate program called Acel Migrate. And this product comes with components to address the typical problems that we see in migration efforts, namely business process reengineering and use of extract transformation and load tools, among other things. And then we will have some time at the end, as Eugene has already stated, for discussion and question and answers. At this point, I'd like to turn it over to Rick.
Yeah, thank you, Rodney. Industry analysts have published a few relevant papers that document success rate for data migrations ranging from 20 to 60%. Even the most optimistic point to significant challenges associated with these migrations. The most commonly cited reasons include difficulty defining the scope, inability to assess data quality, and inadequate testing. Each of these issues imply a lack of understanding about the data. For example, being surprised late in the process that special characters exist in the source system. Reviewing the remaining items, inexperience amongst the team, lack of support from the business community, or absence of a mature methodology. All strongly imply that a team with a track record of success should be part of every migration effort. Let's narrow the scope of our conversation to safety data management. The industry often sees this challenge as follows. Corporate has made an investment in an ETL tool, but these tools do not have any built-in facility for safety data management. In a similar manner, data profiling tools exist, but again, They need to be tailored for dictionary maintenance or duplicate identification. The E2B standard is in wide use, but clients are typically looking to migrate much more than E2B supports. Testing and validation typically leverage a sample-based approach, which tends to be expensive, time-consuming, and misses anomalies. Users understand that the new system will have different functionality and require guidance on how to best repurpose their data. The results, the de facto approach typically relies upon custom SQL scripts and sample-based testing. The migration is iterative in nature and permits data error to be migrated into production. And the functional gaps identified midstream require an inordinate amount of time to resolve. We have asked a number of our clients to define their optimal solution over time, and we have refined the following criteria. Start with a team that has a track record of success with implementation and related data migration. As issues arise, this team is more likely to provide the right guidance. More importantly, if this team has the right experience, they will be likely to be the first to point out these potential problems. In addition to the right team, clients are looking for a migration solution that can perform a detailed analysis on the data early in the migration process. This is absolutely required to scope out data cleansing and data enrichment requirements. Note that the mappings for safety data management migrations from a specific source to a specific target are highly reusable. For example, 60 to 80% of the standard AIRS to Argus or ClinTrace to Argus mapping would be consistent. That said, it makes sense to start each migration with a proven AIRS to Argus configuration out of the box. Here's another interesting observation. Ever ask the business owner of any GXP system what their level of acceptable error might be? The answers are always the same. In short, the risks associated with safety data management require 100% testing. Also, the industry requires sufficient evidence that the migration process works as expected. The level of testing is made more complex by custom scripting or custom coding. And the industry requires a user-driven process made feasible by both a complete list of issues to address and the best practice guidance on how these issues should be resolved. A comment here. Even if the data migration was completed without error as specified, it does not guarantee that the destination system will function as necessary. Evidence has demonstrated the need for a user acceptance test with migrated data. Migrations are a user-centric process. After all, it's the user community that gets to decide whether the migration was a success. That said, O'Carroll has recognized that the user community must be trained and familiar with the new system early in the process. This is required for the users to have the appropriate context on their migration requirements. Others have also recognized that there is typically a gap in functionality between the old and the new applications. The appropriate guidance for reengineering must be available throughout this transition. Rodney?
Thank you, Rick. So then why are we all here? Well, we're here to discuss a specific Accelerate program that BioPharm and Valiance have created. The package is called Accelerate Migrate. Accelerate Migrate strives to address many of these concerns that Rick has already outlined for us. So for example, we have within the product a defined process reengineering methodology used to address the user training and system discrepancies between source and target. Oftentimes, these projects with a well-defined scope can be fixed fee, which makes them very affordable for the industry. We also, using the tools provided by Valiance partners, have a comprehensive migration effort, which Rick will talk to in the subsequent slides. These tools allow for very company-specific and centric migrations with full configuration, and what is unusual about these tools is the 100% automated testing of the migration results, something, as you can tell from the previous slides, that is very critical for the safety industry.
Actually, as everyone can see, there's a process model depicted on this particular page. The methodology that we have is somewhat unique. Typically, if you're looking at a migration process, you're going to plan it out. All right, you're going to typically customize or configure some scripts. You're going to run those migration scripts, and then you're going to start doing some informal testing. If you notice in the diagram here, there are two unique components. Actually, there are three, but let me touch upon the two yellow boxes first. Instead of looking at the data for the first time after the informal testing is done in the latter phases of a migration, we have something that we refer to as pre-migration testing. Actually, after using our automated testing tool for quite some time, we recognized that there were a number of different issues that we could identify relatively early in the process, and the pre-migration testing capability takes advantage of those types of checks that we can do. The other thing to point out here, as Rodney mentioned, is that we do have automated testing. So when we start running things, even in an informal manner or dry running the process, we can verify 100% of the data that's migrated. And this is absolutely critical to migrations in general. It certainly is critical when we're looking at a safety data management system. The other important point to make out on this slide is that the process reengineering is integral to the entire migration effort from beginning to the end. A lot of issues are ferreted out by the migration process. There are typically gaps between the source and the destination, and the process reengineering manages those in an efficient manner.
Okay, so one thing that is extremely vital is to make sure that you are partnering with people who fully understand safety management and the needs of your company when it comes to migration efforts of the safety data between source and target. We believe that our safety consultants are those people. We have an average of 15 years per person in the field of product safety and have used the techniques outlined in this slide multiple times for many companies. We have a broad and varied understanding of the industry. This means CROs, medical device, biotech, and pharma companies, both local to the United States and international in nature. We also have past experience and a proven methodology in process reengineering. This will be vital, as Rick has said, in outlining differences between source and target systems in terms of functionality and potentially even in terms of data point differences. For example, causality categories between the source and the target system that need to be remapped. These things usually ferret out during the process reengineering piece of the project prior to doing any of the data cleansing. Eugene, next slide, please. So what is this process reengineering methodology that we utilize in the Cell Migrate solution? Well, we begin by convening a process improvement team. As we've already stated multiple times, this process must be, the migration effort must be user-driven. So it's very important to get real-world buy-in from the safety practitioners of your companies. This begins, again, with convening a process improvement team. Once the team has been convened, we would then extensively review all quality documents from your organization. This could be SOPs, work instructions, policies, whatever your corporate guidelines are in the use of your existing source system. At BioPharm, we then formulate a formal strength, weaknesses, opportunity, and threat analysis of each document and return to you a comprehensive summary of every single quality document and the SWOT analysis for each. This is an important piece of the analysis. It allows us to incorporate in our contextual knowledge of the regulatory differences among your source and target system, and also any problems that may exist in a global solution with discrepancies between, let's say, Canadian, German, and US-based SOPs. This SWOT analysis then leads us to develop a strategy with the approval and buy-in from the process improvement team to plan out our SOP work instruction redevelopment. Our specialists then facilitate reoccurring meetings to basically walk through any updates or creation of new or identified modifications to SOP and work instructions. Next slide. In this example, we are seeing a recent process reengineering effort where a US-based company needed to integrate a very large subsidiary which was global. And so we began by analyzing a variety of Canadian, French, and British, as well as US SOPs and work instructions. The analysis here was geared toward, again, producing a SWOT analysis. And Eugene, if you could show us the next slide. So here you can see just a sample of the SWOT analysis differences between the Canadian and US SOPs. They have outlined strengths and weaknesses that are both beneficial and problematic for our Canadian and US colleagues when keeping the target system in mind. So remember, these SOPs were written for the source system. It could have been AirSG, Oracle Airs, PV Works, but we as safety experts must keep in mind how the Argus system will function appropriately within the new quality framework that we are trying to get to. Once we have, once we have the SWOT analysis completed, we facilitated meetings with the core process improvement team to get buy-in on all of the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats, again, for every quality document. Next slide. This resulted in the globalization of the SOP and work instructions, as you can see here, a comprehensive guidance for the use of the Argus safety system in a global environment now. So you have 2 SOPs that now are global and several work instructions, 8 here, that allow for the detailed description of how to utilize the Argus safety data in a global environment. Next slide. Rick will now cover the specifics in the SL Migrate package with respects to our migration capabilities. Rick?
Yeah, thank you, Rodney. Actually, there are 2 tools that we'll review here. The first of which is TrueMigrate. It's the tool that actually moves the data. TrueMigrate is an application-aware migration solution. That is, TrueMigrate has significant purpose-built capabilities to interface with various GXP software applications. For safety data management, Trucompare offers an out-of-the-box configuration, for example, AIRS to Argus. It's highly configurable and will not require customization. TrueMigrate was originally conceived as a migration solution for the FDA market, and it has been developed from conception with a robust quality management system. Our clients typically perform a quality audit, which greatly reduces the validation process and related costs. Trucompare is sort of the companion tool that just tests or verifies that the migration was done successfully. Trucompare is an automated testing and validation tool for data migrations. It makes it feasible to verify 100% of the migrated data. Sampling is simply no longer required. TrueMigrate is highly configurable, and the testing process will be managed without customization. Pre-migration testing provides the ability to profile the source data. For safety data management, this includes dictionary maintenance and correction for MedDRA, WHO, and product names. This may also include duplicate identification and remediation if required. Truecompare's reporting capability has been refined over hundreds of migrations to meet our clients' validation requirements. There are options to list all tested records or list just those records with error. Additionally, the user has the ability to select from a number of output formats, including HTML, CSV, text, or a user-defined delimited file format. Experience has demonstrated that it's not always easy to keep a migration specification up to date with the process. Trucompare has a feature that generates a specification directly from the mapping configuration. This Word-compatible file defines the scope of the migration and the source-to-destination mappings. Let's briefly review how the automated post-migration testing works. First, the data scope and source-to-destination mappings are configured using Trucompare's configuration console. Then, the Trucompare configuration is used to test the migrated data. For each migrated field, Trucompare will read the source value, compute the expected result, and compare that expected result to the actual value in the destination. The results of this comparison are compiled into a suitable report for either dry runs or the validation process. The last step is to test the testing tool itself. For this purpose, Trucompare ships with an out-of-the-box draft migration qualification protocol that requires the performance of the following 3 tests. An installation qualification, a test to verify that Trucompare is configured correctly, and the last test verifies 100% of the migrated data. We mentioned pre-migration testing earlier in this presentation. All right. There are typically a number of critical tests to be done here for safety data management. For example, dictionary maintenance assures consistent use of relevant data such as MedDRA and WHO codes or product naming conventions. Excel Migrate provides the capability to define new standards for dictionary maintenance, identifies out-of-spec records in the source, and provides the ability for lookups and correction of such records. Pre-migration testing also has some generic profiling capabilities, such as the ability to identify nulls in the source where a mandatory destination field exists, truncations, or type mismatches. We often see duplicates as a challenge associated with multi-system consolidations. Excel Migrate has built-in features to execute the following. First, to define the characteristics of a duplicate, which typically include patient identification, adverse event, and product information. And second, the ability to identify duplicates across source systems. And lastly, the ability to manage a user-driven disposition process to remediate the duplicate records. The benefits of automated testing include 100% testing. Where other approaches tend to be sample-based, Excel Migrate is able to start automated testing as soon as the migration process is ready. Where others get caught in an iterative test debug cycle, Excel Migrate efficiently reports on 100% of the migrated data during the first dry run. We spoke about pre-migration testing or the ability to manage dictionary maintenance and, if necessary, duplicates. We have found that about half of all the migration errors are actually identified here relatively early in the migration. Additionally, data cleansing and enrichment rules are defined here, giving the team plenty of lead time to manage such activities. The ability to generate a specification directly from the tool virtually guarantees that the validated test mirrors the rules found in the signed spec. Return on investment is real and somewhat proportional to the level of complexity of the migration. And feedback from our customers claim that having evidence for 100% of the migrated data has made it easier for them to address internal and agency audits. For those not yet convinced of the merits of automated testing, consider the following examples. We have all dealt with data level errors such as special characters. Trying to identify these types of anomalies via sampling is like finding a needle in a haystack. Or here's an even more interesting example as it was not so obvious. We were testing a production run where the migration process had already been validated. In this case, automated testing identified that the system administrator omitted a critical procedural step to update the product naming table. If not caught by automated testing, this error would not have been easily identified. However, the client would have eventually uncovered their problem. New cases would have been out of spec and the resulting signal analysis flawed. Here are a few interesting customer quotes. Focus for a moment on the second and the third. For safety data management, what is an acceptable level of error? It's clear here that Trucompare identified error, according to this client, that would have been migrated into production if sample-based testing were used. The third quote is also clear. From this customer's perspective, they were able to save time and money using Trucompare. In short, Excel Migrate saves money and reduces client risk. I just wanted to briefly mention that the techniques described here are applicable to a broad variety of GXP systems and technologies. The benefit to the customer is really pretty straightforward in the sense that they can standardize on a modest number of migration tools. Additionally, it's important to note that even for safety data management migrations, there are typically multiple source systems. For example, a product naming update may originate from a CAPA system, or an adverse event may be migrated from a complaint management system. Having broad application support facilitates the ability to support multiple source systems.
Thank you, Rick. So what we are hoping is that the details that we have previously discussed in this slide presentation help you understand why we believe the Excel Migrate solution is a reasonable and effective approach to addressing a lot of the migration challenges that we talked about at the beginning of this presentation. For example, the use of our safety experts in process reengineering can really combat the number one issue with migration challenges, which is poorly defined scope of use and technology differences between source and target. The data quality issues that are often seen as migration issues. The TruMigrate and Trucompare tools clearly have demonstrated track records in combating that number two issue in migration challenges. And probably the most interesting, from my perspective, piece of our Excel Migrate solution is in fact the combating the inadequate testing issues that arise with other migration efforts, including E2B transmissions of data in terms of migration. And that would be the use of the Trucompare tool to do 100% data verification between the source and the target systems. Eugene, next slide, and Rick.
Thank you. Excel Migrate has a highly referenceable track record for re-engineering and migrations. The majority of our engagements are actually fixed price. We would typically recommend beginning with an assessment phase where we could review the scope of the effort, including a review of the source data with pre-migration testing. Excel Migrate has to be competitive in today's market. Even with the features discussed, we are typically considered a best value proposition. Our out-of-the-box software for migrations and migration testing makes it feasible to conduct a highly proof of concept where appropriate. And the last result is the most telling. 90% of the customers that have purchased a software license have subsequently purchased additional licenses. For the 10% that have not purchased subsequent licenses, the majority are new customers. BioPharm and Valiance are focused on finding better ways to approach safety data management systems. We invite you to become part of the process. Here are the typical ways our clients engage. For those in the early stages, we can help define or review your high-level requirements and share best practice approaches on next steps. For those looking for a better way to test or validate your migration, please reach out and we can compare our experiences. If there's interest, we can always meet for a product demonstration. If you believe there's merit to Excel Migrate but are not quite sure of the fit, let's discuss the potential for an on-site proof of concept. If you are looking to harmonize relevant business processes, please take advantage of our track record of success implementing diverse and global safety systems. All right, and here is a brief listing of some of the references that have provided information or background for the information we provided today.
Excellent. Thank you, gentlemen. Before we move on to the question and answer session, I just want to pass along Rodney's and Rick's contact information. If you guys have any questions or want to request certain information, feel free to contact them directly. You can also visit our websites and gather the contact information there. So it looks like we have several questions right now, and I think we have a good amount of time left for them. But if you do have more questions, feel free to enter them in the chat feature on the left-hand side. So we'll move on to the first question. It's actually a three-part question. In what scenarios would you see the need for these systems? And what volume of migrated data would it make cost-effective sense to do it this way? And for smaller jobs, such as for a few hundred safety ICSRs, manual configuration of non-E2B fields is quite straightforward. So what is the threshold of data where it makes sense to do it the way you propose?
Yeah, actually that's a very interesting, it's a good question. There are a couple of follow-on questions that I would typically ask. If we look at the migration, the first question is it going to be limited to E2B data? I noticed one of the other participants had asked a similar question. If the migration is limited to E2B data, there are standard approaches out of the box that typically work just fine. And the approach that we're recommending here may not be required. However, we find that certainly most of our clients, I believe most of these migrations include more than just the E2B standard. And in those cases, you're typically looking at either manual data entry, creating custom scripts, or using automated tools. And as we've presented here, in those cases where you're even considering using any software to do the migration, we feel that we have a cost-competitive solution.
Rick, I would like to add something to that as well. So again, as you've already stated, I think the importance here is really the business decision and the driving factor behind the migration. For example, while E2B, even in small volumes, is straightforward, as the questioner has asked, it is not always going to give you all of the data fields that you would be looking for pharmacovigilance or signal detection methodologies used at your company. So while it would bring in that case for individual case safety reporting in the global environment, there may be missing data points that would have to be manually completed once the E2B case was created. And that manual rekeying or entry then has a direct effect on user acceptance testing and migration testing, which we've found have been time-consuming and cost ineffective compared to an automated tool use.
Great. We'll move on to the second question. Can the migration tool import history and attachments from a custom system into Argus?
Yes. Actually, the answer is yes. I don't know much about the custom system yet, so I would reserve, let's say, my final decision until we took a look. But we haven't seen a system yet that we couldn't migrate from. Attachments we can certainly handle out of the box. The only issue that we would mention is that we would not start with a predefined configuration in that case, for obvious reasons. In other words, it is a custom source. But we can take advantage of our experience in getting these things configured in an efficient manner. But again, in short, I do not see any reason why that should not work with our tools and technology.
Great. How do you handle MedDRA coding differences due to the version difference in the two systems? For example, AIRS might have an earlier MedDRA version, and Argus now has the most recent version.
Rick, do you want me to take that?
Yeah, please.
Sure. So again, the interesting aspect of the Migrate to Trucompare tool is that we can identify those types of discrepancies well in advance of the actual migration. So we could at least be notified early on in the process. Now, there's also a capability inherent in the Argus application to recode entire groups of information or data. So we could take advantage of that once the migration effort has occurred, or we could utilize the tool to do the remapping. Rick, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, let me just mention that if we have an updated standard set of MedDRA codes, we can identify those records in the source that have MedDRA code values that are out of sync with what is required. And we can correct that as part of the migration process with lookups.
Great. Next question is, can we use this tool for testing of data migration as part of the upgrade from AIRS 4.5 to AIRS 4.7?
Yeah, absolutely. As a matter of fact, it's a good question. We have had a couple of customers come back and just wanted to verify that the upgrade process works. We do have ways to sort of efficiently configure the tool for an upgrade that is best to discuss offline, but the answer is definitely yes.
Next question is, how would the Excel migration tool function in a multi-schema platform?
Rick, I can take this one. So in a multi-schema platform, I'm intuiting that the customer is requesting information about Oracle AIRS migration in multi-schema, and then it would depend on whether the target, Argus in this case, would be the 7.0 multi-tenant version of Argus, or if in fact you were merging for some reason all schemas into a single tenant. In any case, regardless of the actual reason behind the multi-tenant migration, the process reengineering and true migrate capabilities of Cell Migrate are completely comprehensive, and I do not believe there is any technological reason that we would have any problems migrating that information. Rick, did I misspeak?
No, not at all. I think the only thing that I would point out is that when we look at multiple schema sources, there may be subtle differences between each schema per se, and we can efficiently reconfigure, add a few fields, or modify from one schema to the next, and I think our tool actually looks good in that scenario.
Great. The next question is, can your product handle the migration to an AIRS-G system?
Yes, it can. We're typically talking about Argus here, I guess, is a destination. Someone might notice in the upper right-hand corner of the presentation it says something about an Oracle Gold partner. But AIRS-G, yes, we have done AIRS-G migrations as well.
Great. Next question is, how long does the process take from start to finish if, for example, you have 1,000 adverse event cases from a homegrown database into Argus? And the follow-up question with that is it cost effective for less than 1,000 cases or more?
I believe that it would likely be cost effective if we're looking at a homegrown or custom solution for the following reason. You're going to have to custom create a migration capability, and you're going to have a significant challenge in testing and verifying that actually worked correctly. So more often than not, this is the case where we see custom SQL scripts with sample-based approaches. And not to repeat what we've said here already today, with the downside of that approach, we can use our tool, we can configure it without customization. We do have in-house testing that has verified all the different configuration settings, so the validation process of that configuration is relatively straightforward. But yes, I do believe that it is likely that it would be cost effective to use TrueMigrate, Trucompare, Excel Migrate for a 1,000-case custom solution. Great,
thank you. The next question is a bit long, and I'm going to ask it the way it was phrased. So if you can't answer it, that's fine. How do you handle obtaining the correct version number for the ICSRs? For example, in AIRS, you might have the initial report and follow-up 1 and 2 when Argus goes live with the data from AIRS is migrated. Another follow-up report for the report migrated from AIRS comes in and is entered into Argus. How is the correct version number captured? This should be follow-up 3, but I have often seen that this case in Argus is counted as an initial report since it is the first case entered directly into Argus?
Rick, would you like me to take a stab at that?
Yeah, please.
Okay, so yes, we've seen the same thing, again though, with manual migrations or E2B migration efforts. This gets us back to the number one issue with data migration efforts, which is poor scope. So again, I think that with the proper scoping of the project, the Acel Migrate solution can definitely effectively bring over all, as Rick's already stated, all versions of a case, historical data included, and in that also the previously submitted reports. So you would not see, and we have not seen with our recent migration efforts, any kind of problem with follow-up versus initial reporting. But again, it's very important to scope that out in the beginning.
Yeah, let me just add that I believe that the E2B standard typically sets the version to 1, and there's little control from the user's perspective on how to modify that version setting. We can set the version number as to our client rules so that we're not limited by the E2B standard in that case. I think that was also part of that question.
Right, and just again a follow-up, you could import in multiple follow-ups to that initial E2B report, but again that would have to be scoped out in the beginning of your project.
Right, that's correct.
All right, next question. I know the answer to this one, but I'll ask to be fair. What's a ballpark price for a typical heirs to Argus out-of-box migration?
Actually, we haven't seen the typical one just yet. It's probably best if someone has a near-term need to reach out to either Rodney or myself, and let's talk a little bit more specific about what your migration challenges are. It's just to throw out a couple different examples. We've recently completed, let's say in the last 3 months, I believe we've completed 6 migrations, and I would say on average they took somewhere north of 6 months. We're about to complete another one that's literally going to take 6 weeks. All right, and there's a whole host of questions about data cleansing, about the scope of the data, is the source or destination customized, and again, if you reach out to either Rodney or myself, I think we can respond pretty quickly.
Yeah, I concur with Rick, and just again to reiterate, it's garbage in, garbage out a lot of the time. So many times we'll be dealing with source systems whose processes were ill-defined or not as mature at the initial onset of that use of that system, and therefore the data quality in the cases is questionable. So that obviously takes longer to fix, if you will, in the migration effort. So there's just so many moving parts, it's hard for us to give a specific ballpark. But again, as we've already stated, projects with a very well-defined scope, we have been able to come up with quite cost-effective fixed-fee bids that make the migration effort cost-effective.
Great. On to the next question. Do you have experience migrating from multiple legacy applications into, quote, safety suite, end quote? For example, from a safety database plus a separate E2B module plus a separate source file archiving?
Actually, I would have to get back to the participant with that question with an answer. I'd have to check with the team.
So, Rick, I guess in our last engagement, did we not pull PDF files from one system and incorporate it into the Argus system? I just can't remember. But I think that's what the caller's getting to. Have we utilized the tool in that capacity, taking information from repository A and B and merging it into repository C?
Oh, if that's the question, then I apologize for to the participant who asked. But yes, if you look at the way both TrueMigrate and Trucompare were developed, we're assuming that there are multiple source systems for the typical migration. We can either use multiple sources, using one for supplemental data, for example, or simply work on consolidations and have worked on consolidations upwards of more than 30-plus systems at a time.
And I would just like to reiterate that in the previous engagement that I was speaking of, we took, the True Migrate tool took 3 separate existing safety systems and merged the case data into a single Argus globalized environment. So there is definitely a proven track record in that example as well.
Yeah, thank you, Rodney.
Great. For UAT, who writes the scripts to ensure that all issues are addressed and tested?
It's a very good question. Actually, it's a similar question for a PQ, I would say. But if you look at what we would typically recommend from a data migration perspective, is focus on using the data in an end-to-end process and look very carefully at reports that have both system-generated data and migrated data in the same report to assure that it makes sense to the users. There may be some other specific issues that the users may wish to look at as well, but that's probably a good place to get started.
Excellent. Can this software be used for migrating from ClinTrace to Argus for our safety data that is hosted with a safety vendor versus the actual sponsor?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and we've done this for a number of customers. A lot of safety systems are managed by third parties. As long as the client has contractual access to do such a migration, there's absolutely no technical limitation whatsoever.
And I would just like to add that currently, right now, we're in the middle of a divestiture project, which is very similar. So we have Company A that was acquired by Company B. Company B wants Company A's safety data migrated into their repository. So this is very similar in nature to the question that the caller was asking.
As a matter of fact, it's an interesting example because in that particular case, the source system is actually managed by a competitor to those that are receiving it on the destination side, as it would be in any divestiture. And we're sort of acting as an independent third-party steward to extract the data, to move it to the new system, and to assure both parties. In other words, the company that is divesting as well as the new entity, that all things are being done to their satisfaction.
Excellent. Next question is, for the multi-schema migration, all the dictionaries would have to be the same, correct? Who drug as well? What about verbatim terms applied?
Rick, I'll try and answer this, and then you can correct me or yell at me if I'm wrong, okay?
Okay.
So, no, I do not believe that all of the target cases would have to be on the same version. That's something that you would decide in the scoping of the project. It would be completely feasible to load all previous versions of MedDRA into Argus or the target system, and then as the migration occurred, point the cases to the respective versions of MedDRA or WHO drug. As far as the verbatim term assignments, or what the industry calls company synonyms, for verbatim terms classified to a lowest level term or to a preferred name synonym in WHO drug, those can be transferred over with the migration effort as well. Rick, did I misspeak?
Oh, not at all, and I'm so glad that you answered that question. It turns out most of the challenges associated with that are platform dependent. The migration software will sort of do what was asked, if you will.
Next question is, how would this work if we host errors and want to migrate to a third-party hosted Argus system?
Actually, I guess in short what I would say is I'm not clear that there's that much of a significant difference for a hosted environment. Again, most of the systems that our customers are asking us to migrate to and from are hosted by third parties. It's just the nature of safety data management systems. As long as the client has access to that system, there is typically no further technical limitation.
Again, I'm just going to kind of piggyback on that and stress the example projects that we've already discussed, the globalization project, where the software system was in fact hosted, and then the divestiture that we've just recently discussed, which again is equivalent to hosted. It's hosted by the source company, and the target company needs to migrate that data over. So again, we've had experience in that type of mechanism to control it. While it does complicate things, it only complicates it from a procedural level, such as who has access, why they have access, what access to the data they need. But the tools itself and the business processing are largely ineffective, I would say, or unaffected, I would say. Rick, do you agree?
Absolutely.
All right, next question is the arrangement to only use this tool bundled with your migration services, or can the tool be purchased outright for our company's IT group to implement?
It's a great question. This was a set of tools that were originally developed as commercially available off-the-shelf software packages. I would say on the order of half of the licenses sold are sold to customers that will be using, let's say, their own internal team to get the migration completed.
Great. Next question is, with regards to validation, how much assistance do you typically provide, or is it on a case-by-case situation?
The validation of the migration, if we were having this discussion a few years ago, I would have said that it's a bit more complex. Today, using an automated testing tool for data migrations is not that novel in the sense that there are other automated testing tools that are out there. We find that over half the customers embrace the migration qualification protocol that we recommend out of the box. Other customers tend to want to do some functional testing of the software. For those customers, we invite them in to look at the testing that we've done here. And in those cases, more often than not, customers will spend maybe a day doing a vendor audit, recognize that our quality management system in-house is sufficient, and that the functional testing that we've already done eliminates the need for them to repeat any of that type of testing. So again, from a validation perspective, we believe that our clients have a very efficient process.
Excellent. Next question is, during the development, testing, and production migration process, is it best to have a database export, even for homegrown systems, locally to the target database, or just a VPN connection from the source to target?
I think the question really relates to throughput and performance over a network. If we're looking at 1,000 cases, I would answer the question one way versus 1,000,000 cases for obvious reasons. We do look to test or verify the throughput as part of the early analysis work that we do and make recommendations. We have seen certain situations where we've, let's say, hand-carried the data where the throughput was simply not sufficient enough. And in other cases where we had a modest level of volume, low network bandwidth, and sufficient time, we were able to come up with a process that worked that way as well. All right. So again, throughput it is a challenging issue, especially for larger migrations, but we can manage it in a couple of different ways.
Great. Looks like we answered all the questions, and it looks like we've actually used up most of the allotted time we've had for this webinar. So that'll end our Q&A session. If you have any other questions, please feel free to contact us directly. The information is on the slide that's currently up. Once again, please note that today's webinar will be available on biopharm.com and possibly Valiance within 24 hours for you to review and share with your colleagues. We thank you for your participation and hope that the information we provided you guys today was helpful and informative. And that does it. Have a great rest of the day, and we hope to have you guys again on future webinars. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good day.